Ladies and gentlemen, let's start if you wish. Welcome to Brussels and welcome to the third State of the European Union Conference. I'm Bernard Vergne. I'm the chairman of the EEC, one of the organizers of the conference. 300 years ago, a man named Guillaume Thomas Raynal, a Frenchman, was born. This year we are celebrating his 300th anniversary in France, but also in Berlin, in Potsdam, in Belgium, in Quebec, in Geneva. He remains known as the Abbé Raynal. The Abbé Raynal is the author of a very emblematic book named The Philosophical and Economical History of Both Indies being in those days India on one side and America on the other side. That book heralded something that was not called yet free trade, but basically he is one of the first person having written on free trade. His book also heralded the equality between men and women, which was something quite unique in those days. And he is the first one that wrote on no slavery being as a motto. Because of his position, he was exiled. He was thrown out of France. He lived in Belgium, in Switzerland. He ended up with Frederick II in Potsdam. And why I'm talking about him is because in 1789, in the premise of the French Revolution, he was called to be part of the États Généraux, the first meeting of the French Revolution. He was then 76. He was living in Marseille and felt too old to go to Paris for that. So he sent a letter, an open letter to the États Généraux, which I have here. And this open letter starts by a letter to the king, to Louis XVI. And in some way, I feel some analogy between what we do here, trying to get some messages to the authorities of Europe, and what this guy wrote in 1789. Let me just read a few. I've translated freely his French text, but it reads like, "Young prince, you rule on the best empire of the universe. In spite of the decadence in which it has fallen, there is no place on earth where arts and sciences support each other with more splendor. Foreign nations need you. If your provinces enjoy the fecundity they could achieve, if your troops, without being more numerous, were as disciplined as they should, if your revenues, without getting bigger, would be better administered, if a spirit of spare was shared by all your ministers and by your administrations, if your debts were reimbursed, no power would be as formidable as yours." And it goes on for 10 pages. Obviously, you know the end of that story. They ended up beheading Louis XVI. I hope it won't happen here. But going back to our, by the way, if you have never heard about the Abbé Raynal, don't feel ashamed. What happened to him is that 4 years later, he felt the revolution was getting a little bit screwed. That was the beginning of the terror. So he sent, he wrote a letter that is very famous, which is his letter to the Assemblée Constituante. And they got mad at him. But he was 80. He was living in Marseille. He was very famous. He was recognized, and they decided to let him live until his death. They didn't behead him. But he was submitted to one of the first fatwa, we would call that today. His bust, his picture, his sculpture, his statue, was taken out of the French Academy. His statue was beheaded. His statue was buried. His books were burned in front of the Academy. And Robespierre decided and said, he's a fool. Everything he wrote is crazy. He should be forgotten forever and ever. And basically, nobody heard about him until fairly recently, when we started reading his books again and finding out that he was the equal of Diderot and Voltaire. So that's the Abbé Raynal. And going back to our conference, Revitalizing the European Dream. I think never before has the title of this conference been more to the point. Wherever you go, whatever you read, Europe gets criticized and questioned. Europe is losing support. Euroscepticism is on the rise. 75% of the UK people, according to the recent poll, don't believe in Europe. 72% in Spain, 62% in Italy, 56% in France, and even in Germany, which seems to be the best economy of the European Union, 61% of the people would rather not be thinking about Brussels. So it is reinvigorating in some way to see that 55 corporations have decided to contribute to this conference and support the conference. So let me thank all of the sponsors and all of the partners. Together, you represent 1,300 billion euros, 1,300 billion euros of revenue. You employ over 5 million people. So the corporation supporting this conference really have a weight, something like 13% of the GDP of the Eurozone. Let me also thank another person, our Master of Ceremony. In a few moments, he will give you a rapid rundown of the day. Bob Gaugial, he sits right over there, and is the CEO of Integron. And he has handcrafted the content, and he will manage the day. And for that, I would like to applaud him. Before handing the floor to Francis Bailly from General Electric to present our first speaker, let me point out that our conference is a sort of rare bird. It's something quite special. We're not a lobbying group. We're not a union. We're not a think tank. We're just a reunion at a moment in time of several multinationals that believe in Europe. And in some way, it is sort of difficult to get that message across to the European Authority. Who do you represent? Well, we represent ourselves. We believe in Europe, and we want to tell you how we believe it and how we think you should evolve. So fortunately, tomorrow morning, the speakers of the conference have an opportunity to meet with key people from the European Commission. We'll meet with the Director General of the BIPA, the Bureau of European Policy Advisors. We'll meet with the head of cabinets of Commissioner Karel de Gucht, Commissioner Nelly Cruz, with key members of Barroso cabinet. In all, about 16 people from the Commission will listen to what we have exchanged today and to the conclusion of our two surveys. So what you contribute today will be heard and hopefully listened to in the highest spheres of the Brussels administration. This said, have a good day, have a good conference, and thank you all for being here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Bernard, for this very inspiring introduction for the conference. Actually, there was one book that wasn't burnt, and this is the one that you have in your hands, the original edition, so congratulations for finding it. In the international press, Europe is very often described as the sick child of Europe, going through its most turbulent times in recent history with limited investments, very modest growth, and high unemployment. But in this room, beside the pessimism of many commentators, we believe that Europe has weathered the storm and will be emerging stronger from the crisis. In my own company, GE, with 24 billion euros sales and 84,000 employees in Europe, we like to see a Europe rich from its diversity, its technology, clearly the largest economic area of the world with $16 trillion of GDP, above the US, which are at 14, and certainly at least 2 times the GDP of China. So if we see sluggish demand and slow growth in the western part of the continent, we also see in Europe strong, steady growth in many countries of Central Eastern Europe, leveraging the structural funds from the EU to develop their investments in infrastructure. There are also pockets of growth in some industries like aviation, showing impressive innovation, as you will see again at the next Paris Air Show in 2 weeks' time from now. The challenge, therefore, for our companies is not to lament about the current situation, but to increase our competitiveness by simplifying our processes, become much more agile than we are today, and invest in innovation and product development. How can we, with the European politicians, restore the climate for re-energizing the economy and help to come back to strong, solid growth? In one word, how can we be more faster, simpler in everything we do? This is what José Manuel Barroso, President of the European Commission, who could not be with us today, is going to tell us in this recorded message. Mr. Barroso.
Ladies and gentlemen, I regret that prior commitments prevent me from being present with you today. I am, however, delighted to address this 3rd annual edition of the State of the European Union through this message. And as there are live connections across the continent, I would like to greet all participants, not only here in Brussels, but also in Frankfurt, London, Milano, Paris, and Warsaw. I very much welcome this initiative of bringing together industrial and political leaders, giving global companies the opportunity to express a corporate view of how to revitalize the European dream, as they are invited to by the title of this conference. Today, Europe must move beyond the crisis, and the task of building an ever closer Europe needs to continue. Easy solutions are not an option. We need a bold and comprehensive response. This response includes addressing the challenges of fiscal consolidation and accelerating the pace of structural reforms. The pace of reforms needs to be stepped up to secure recovery and to ensure the rebalancing of the economy. So-called deficit countries need to boost their competitiveness, and surplus countries need to remove obstacles to the growth of their domestic demand. With its recommendations adopted last week, the European Commission offers a response that is both tailored to individual member states and good for the European economy as a whole. And Europe needs a consensus on policies that are both right for us as a union and right for each member state. This is why completing the architecture of the economic and monetary union, particularly the banking union, is so essential to underpin future sustainable growth and prevent the re-emergence of imbalances. And beyond stabilizing and rebalancing our economy, we are striving to provide Europe's businesses with new key levers for growth and competitiveness, removing obstacles and tackling bottlenecks in the single market. We are well underway in the delivery phase of Europe 2020, our holistic, targeted strategy for sustainable growth and jobs, with a new approach to innovation and a fresh take on industrial policy, reducing red tape for companies, tackling high energy costs, addressing the skills mismatch, and making sure that businesses, especially SMEs, can finance themselves. These are some of our priority actions to boost competitiveness and to strengthen European industry. They also include sharing the benefits of the more positive economic outlook in other regions of the world through an active trade agenda, with, for example, the upcoming transatlantic trade and investment partnership. And last but not least, We need investments that boost the real economy and give hope to the most vulnerable. We need to step up the fight against unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, which is now at a critical level in some of our member states. With the European budget dedicated to growth for 2014-2020, we shall soon have the financial incentives to support our objectives even more effectively, to assist member states in making often long overdue reforms at all levels, to help industries raise their competitiveness, to reignite the real economy. Ladies and gentlemen, the outcome of your discussions today will no doubt be a source of inspiration for the European Commission. I am therefore happy that tomorrow morning a dedicated debriefing with some of you will be hosted by my Bureau of European Policy Advisors, with the participation of Trade Commissioner Karel de Gucht. There is indeed no way back to business as usual. We need to reform and to reform now. I firmly believe that the benefit of taking action now is that Europe will become more competitive, more resilient, and Europe will emerge stronger from the crisis. I wish you a very successful event.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. With that as the context of today's discussion and debate, I'd like to open up the conference with Marc Lermite, who's a partner at Ernst & Young in their International Location Advisory Services Group. Marc has been responsible for a number of years of the E&Y attractiveness study. Some of you have already seen the results in yesterday and today's papers. And let me turn immediately the floor over to Marc, who will present the major findings of the study. Marc?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Special thanks to Denis, a great friend, a great mind. Thank you for inviting us. It's an honor. It's some pressure, but it's also pleasure. And this morning, instead of telling you about the so many ways Europe will disappear, as a lot of experts could, let me report on 10 stories of contrast and confidence that I have extracted from our 11th European Attractiveness Survey. Contrast and confidence because, as we've heard a few minutes ago, foreign investors, we are investing and contributing to Europe's future, while we all know that Europe is in the middle of its worst ever economic crisis. But these companies that we've interviewed, and a lot of you are in the room, thanks very much, see Europe with positive eyes that we may not have anymore. They speak with voices that are slightly different from the one we hear in the media, in political hallways, and in corporate hallways as well. Before taking you through those 10 snapshots, let me begin with a few words about methodology. I love this part, and I'm sure you will as well. This year's European Attractiveness Survey is like its 10 predecessors. We try to be consistent. It's based on an original two-part methodology. It looks at Europe's real attractiveness for foreign direct investors and compares it with how they perceive Europe and its competitors. So the survey uses data that Ernst & Young gathers in 44 countries. So it's a very extended Europe, to Russia, to Turkey. It's business Europe as we see it, as you see it. And we also interviewed, in March of this year, 808 precisely international executives. So the results is a very interesting confrontation and contrast between the reality and the perception. So let me take you to the first of these stories. So what happened to foreign investment in 2012 and early 2013? What sectors did grow or decline? And what are business leaders thinking and proposing for Europe in the face of competition? Let me turn to the first story for some answers. The investment map is on the move, but not exactly as we could have expected. First, the two hotspots that you can see on your screens. They're enjoying surprisingly rapid gains. That's from the Perception Survey. 800 executives told us that Brazil's attractiveness has gone up more than any other country. And it's now the world's fourth most attractive investment destination. Moving up the ladder also is Russia, which gets 20% of votes, thanks to the need for resources, opportunities, despite business conditions there, sometimes challenging, we all know that. On the other end of the attractiveness world on this map, we're very ambitious this morning. Investors did not appear, that's important, as enthusiastic as they used to be towards China and its slightly more moderate growth. India is also down because of several infrastructure and reform bottlenecks, but China is still the #1 magnet of your attention with 43% of perception votes. What about our mature economies? The US gets a solid 29% actually. And crucially, finally, our 2013 survey shows that tough times have not totally destroyed faith in the continent, in Europe. With 32% of perception votes, Europe, East and West, remains among the most attractive global regions, despite economic contraction, unemployment, widespread unemployment, rising public debt. Investors, you have learned to master the new normal situation of Europe. Perception matters. We'll look at that in a moment, but one of the striking illustrations of our survey is the mismatch, the gap between perception and reality, because I want to show you what the real investment map looks like. Europe is in fact the #1 destination with 22% of all global foreign direct investment. China represents just 9%, by the way. So we do have a mature economy running and sometimes slowly competing against faster growth economy, but remember that investors like the known, predictable, and safe long-term options. And apparently Europe does that for them in 2013. So, my question, why is this man getting 32% of your love, 22% of your money, and approximately 0% of your growth? It might not be very dynamic, but there is strength and there is mass. There is no growth or little growth, but there is resilience. The number of FDI decisions in 2012 was 3,800 projects that we recorded, thanks to the great team, some of them assembled in this room. These projects, 3,800, have brought approximately 170,000 jobs across 44 countries in Europe, a sign that foreign investors are staying the course and continue to be attracted by our market and business conditions despite everything. As Francis said earlier, Europe's economy is probably a little bit over 2 times bigger than that of China, and Abbé Raynal told us it's the hotbed for arts and science still now. Now I'd like to take you inside Europe in terms of country rankings. Some of you are interested in that. We see a fragmented Europe. And first, 3 situations in Western Europe. There is competition at the top, where the UK, Germany, and France, the big 3, accounted for 46% of the total number of foreign direct investment projects. However, within the big 3, the UK and Germany are in a league of their own, as you can see on this chart. They are Europe's candidate to the World League, to the Champions League. The UK remains Europe's top FDI destination. And Germany, you can see this decade-long journey up, has become an affordable powerhouse, the center of gravity for investors in Europe, matching many of their expectations in a post-crisis economy, going green, looking east, strong government. This leads to our second situation. Some Western European countries did fairly well, offered either safety, like Belgium, Finland, or opportunities to companies looking for bargains and abundant skills, like Spain and Ireland, for instance. And for these reasons, these countries and a few others have increased their share of FDI in 2012. Then, we can say that there was certainly room for improvement in other countries, France, Italy, but also the Netherlands and Switzerland, which have attracted fewer projects and fewer jobs and fewer capital in 2012 because of, take your pick, weaker growth, higher cost, uncontrolled debt, some problems with governance. Let's go east now. I don't want to rebuild the wall, but let's go east to the newer and future Europe, which, simply put, receives 20% of decisions, but 50% of jobs, and approximately 50% of capital. Central and Eastern Europe, and that's a big news from this year's survey, has rebounded as a competitive near-shore location for large manufacturing and back-office operations. This was especially true, as you can see on the map, in Poland, certainly, but also in Russia, Serbia, and Turkey, thus extending Europe's borders. Now, I'd like to spend a few minutes on the source of foreign direct investment. First, where is the money coming from? What you have on this chart is that intra-European investment by German companies in the UK, by Swiss companies in Finland, for instance, and everybody else to Poland, was the number one source of foreign direct investment in projects in Europe, more than half, followed by US investment, a large quarter of the pie. But we see also on this chart that the rapid growth economies are not only critical as markets, they're also the source of approximately 250 new deals and 12,000 new jobs, totally new jobs in headquarters, in research and development centers in Europe, a record. And to give you an example, Chinese firms like Clenergy, ET Solar continued their investment drive in the region, focusing on heavy machinery, clean tech, and other sectors. We've asked also our very distinguished panel, 800 executives, about Europe's future economy. Is it going to be really green and digital? Yes, as new technologies sweep aside all ways of doing things, information and communication technologies, 31%, the energy sector, 28%, pharma and biotech, 23%, clean tech, 20%, are and will be the engines of growth in the coming years. Yet, what I want to show you is there is a long way before these intentions turn into real investment. To give you an example, the clean tech sector accounted for only 3% of FDI and biotech only for 2%. While services, which very few of you mentioned, by the way, actually generated 65% of projects in Europe. So there is a lot of work needed to understand better Europe, but also in new policies, regulations. These are totally new sectors. This is a new economy. Incentives, investments to turn these projections into reality. A good way to illustrate this, actually, to illustrate the new clients of Europe, is to show you the list of Europe's main investors of 10 years ago on the left-hand side and compare it with the current situation. As you can see, a complete change, a sign that a new Europe is emerging. What about 2014? And I want to turn to the final four snapshots where your voice sends constructive message. This is the first one. Although our growth prospects in the Eurozone and beyond remain weak, business leaders, you appear realistically optimistic. That's the phrase we coined for this, realistically optimistic. 38% are planning to establish operations in Europe in 2014. 38%. It's a striking increase from, as you can see, the 26% recorded in last year's survey. So you're trying to master this new situation, and you think Europe remains a safe long-term bet. That's what you said in your interviews. It will be through business acquisitions, expansion, not through new projects. That's what I meant. There may be acquisitions along the way. Joint ventures will be more common. It's almost as if you would rather build upon what you already have than create totally new things. That's the new Europe we're going to have in 2014. One of the interesting illustrations is that of our survey is that Made in Europe remains a formidable brand. And one of my favorite questions of this year's survey, of last year as well, a very large majority of the panel said they will still manufacture in Europe in the next 10 years. Actually, a very, very large majority, 84%. You will manufacture in Europe. It will certainly be leaner, richer in services, in technology, despite the high costs, tighter supply chain, but you believe that open innovations, bridges between plants and campuses, all this close to end consumer makes Made in Europe an attractive label in emerging markets, for instance. But having said that, we can all agree this morning that Europe needs to be better at marketing, because I can certainly bet that few in this room would have guessed this result. Now for some challenges. We're getting along and to the final 3 lessons of our presentation. Europe is attractive, but reforms are wanted. Our survey clearly showed that we need to find ways of delivering very high quality European proposition at a better price. Yes, innovation is on top of Europe's agenda, and we'll dig into that thanks to our friend Booz and INSEAD this afternoon. It's on top of your agenda, it's on top of Europe's agenda, but also foreign investors gave us the clear message that Europe must get its act together in terms of being more competitive, more disciplined, and a little bit more flexible. My next to last lesson is that Europe, according to our survey, needs to work on its innovation hotspots, a renovated set of cities that will play a role in a competitive world. Why? Because of the top 10 cities where, and that was a question of our survey, where the next Google will emerge, we found that, I didn't know there was going to be a music. That's the only music today, I guess, Bob, so that was mine. Of the 10 cities where the next Google will emerge, 3 were in India, 2 in China, 1 in Japan, leaving 3 in the US, and London as the only European option. That's not possible. I love London, but that's not possible that London is the only one. You know what I mean. In our interviews, what investors said is that Europe has the hardware, certainly the infrastructure, some of the humanware, most of it, but it lacks software. And if I may add, it lacks silverware, meaning money. The good news is that our survey also showed that there are local solutions. There are solutions at the local level that governments haven't been able to create at the national or European levels. And we mean, and you mean, that Europe needs to stick together, but at the same time, one of the core strengths of Europe is its diversity. And that's a very strong message of this survey. Diversity of markets, opportunities, of talents. There is a downside to this fragmentation that I've described. Division, dispersion, separation, maybe. But there is an upside, which is Europe's incredible diversity makes it greater than the sum of its parts. Finally, our last lesson is that Europe has a way, its own way, out of the crisis. And again, the conference will dive into the many ways to improve our competitiveness. Europe needs to innovate. Investors insist they need more support for high-tech industries and innovation. Europe needs to educate in skills, invest in skills and talent. It needs to take risks, be more entrepreneurial. But what is striking in those messages that you will find in our excellent survey is that Europe would attract investors if, in fact, it behaved like an emerging market, an emerging destination. Will it happen? Will business and government leaders today, tomorrow, and beyond, get the message and act, we'll see. But if we step back for a minute, or for a day, and I think we have, from the gloom and doom of slow growth, not ignore it, but just set it aside. I think we see investors that paint a Europe that is more white than black and more hope than despair. We see investors who see opportunities in Europe, who admire its size and leadership. But at the same time, these investors have expectations. So let's meet these expectations and reinvent Europe as an emerging destination. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Can I ask my panel now to join me up here in the front? While the panel is settling in, let me just explain what's going to happen for the next hour and 15 minutes. As you see on the screen, we've got our local virtual town hall meetings going on in Frankfurt, in London, in Milan, in Paris, and Warsaw, as well as in St. Andrews in Scotland. I will give each of those workshops a specific task. I'll mention those tasks in a moment. While they are working on their task, we've got a couple questions here. We'll be debating in Brussels, and then at about 11:15 they'll come back and give us the results of that study that they're doing in each of those locations. In London, I'm asking the group to debate the question, what is the future role of London in particular as a financial services center and more broadly as a center for business services. In Paris, I am asking the group to debate and discuss the concept of creating competitive clusters. In Milan, question how to maintain the creativity edge that Italy has so impressively shown in the past. In Frankfurt, I'm asking the group to debate the model for export competitiveness. Obviously, Germany's done something right to keep it going over time. And lastly, I've asked Warsaw to discuss the notion of sustainable logistics. So can each of the 5 locations now begin their local debates? You'll stay on mute, and let's turn now to my first panel here. While the local panels do their own discussion, we'll come back to them in a moment. My chairman of this roundtable is Pascal Macios, who's the EMEIA Chief Operating Officer for Ernst & Young. On my left, we've got Takahiro Tomonaga from Mitsui, who runs their Benelux operation. On my right, I've got Dirk Jan Epping, who is a member of the European Parliament. Welcome. I've got Pierre Saint-Arnaud, who's President and General Manager of ABB in France. And on his right, we've got Thierry Merlot, who is from Hexcel Composites and is VP and General Manager for Europe, Asia, Pacific. So welcome, panel. The first question I'd like you to debate around is, Pascal, would you give me some context, and then we'll have a discussion.
Thanks, Bob, and I'll make it with pleasure. Good morning to everyone. Today we'll be discussing Europe's future and asking whether our region remains relevant. It's probably a provocative question, but it's a question that we cannot avoid even if we are passionate of Europe as I am. Why is this the case? I'm not going to bombard you with statistics. Everyone in the room knows that the economic crisis continues to inflict huge damage and pain on Europe businesses and citizens, but let me give you some leap out. Investment has been reduced by 350 billion since the beginning of the century. The current Eurozone recession is now in its 6th quarter. and probably most insidious of all, a total of 19.2 million of people are without employment. Think about it for a moment. It's not just a number. More than 19 million households across the region are coping with vastly reduced earnings, and it's getting worse, not better, unfortunately. In this context, it's hardly surprising that in addition to polls across Europe showing rising disenchantment vis-à-vis EU, social unrest is also increasing in many countries. But it's not all bad news. This in itself is very important. Confidence can be fragile even at best time, let alone during an economic downturn. It also helps us to understand why European companies remain reluctant to invest. We still have billions of euros in the balance sheet to the detriment of the economy of Europe. So, to redrive the balance, here are a couple of statistics that show some important chinks of light. First, Europe continues to be the world's largest single market. With just 7% of the population, the EU trade with the rest of the world accounts for 20% of global export and imports. I will not repeat the comment made by my colleague Mark Lermit, but let me stress a couple of points in the study we made. Europe remains the world leading destination for foreign direct investment. The number of jobs created by FDI has increased by 8% in 2012. And more importantly, business leaders appear optimistic. 38% are planning to establish operation in Europe in 2014, a big increase from 26% last year. In other words, Europe is showing a very strong resilience, and we as businessmen can participate to restore its dynamic and its confidence. There is no point in denying the challenges, but we need to put forward, as our competitors do, our huge strengths. A strong market, a unique capacity for evolution, and more importantly, probably, a key role in the value chain, among many other factors. Now let me give you some couple of examples from my own experience. During my career at EY, I have had the privilege of working across the EU. I have seen the strengths by myself. Very highly skilled workforces, many world-class universities, capacity for hard work, and many others. I should mention at this point that our own way to see Europe is a little bit extended. I would say we have been to the limit of the maximum of our imagination. Currently, EMEA for us composes 85 countries, spans from Brussels to Joburg and from Moscow to Mumbai, a very large Europe. But let's come back to my examples. I do think that there is no thing as an old world and a new world. There is one world where we need to be more agile, more creative, and quicker. In our businesses, audit, advisory, tax, legal, many of the innovation, like new solutions, new tools, a radical change in the way we operate, are coming from the so-called old Europe. Most of our key talents from Europe visit the rest of the world, bringing new competencies, bringing values to our clients, and demonstrating how deep our expertise. This in itself is creating employment in this part of the world. Another quick example. If we have the time to make a poll, I would ask you, which is our faster European growing region, sorry. We have no time for that, but the answer is Mediterranean. The Mediterranean region for us is composed of Italy, Spain, and Portugal, which are not probably the three major booming countries in these days, but for us it's a real good market. Why that? Because we have invested in the right people and in the right solution, and we are making huge progresses. That's a demonstration of confidence, and if I go back to the 10th point of Mark, it's a demonstration that innovation, taking risk, will pay. I will close my remark on this example and return to you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Pascal. I've got Jim Barber in Edinburgh. Is he on, Ludo, yet? Okay. will you just give me a signal when he is live? He's also a member of this town hall. When he comes live, come tell me. Let me first start with a question for the panel before we turn to Jim. Let me ask you, Pierre, when you explain to your headquarters Europe, and you ask the question, is there a gap in perception between what you live here day to day in Europe and what Europe is really about? Do you see a gap in their perception with what you live on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I actually, to the point you were making, Europe is obviously very relevant to ABB. We have 36% of our sales in Europe, out of 40 million worldwide billions US dollars. So a very significant market, and as Francis was pointing out, it is in fact, if you regroup all of it, the largest marketplace in the world. At the same time, it's not yet working as one market because of all these countries which are present. And you can see, for instance, that in ABB, for instance, there is president in all of these countries. There is some president in all of these countries. If you compare to the US, for instance, there is one president. There is a much simpler structure that exists over there. So I think one of the things we need in Europe is a more cohesive approach and common ground on what Europe is doing from a business point of view. So that is in fact a one market situation and not the multiple market situation. So in the headquarters in Zurich, I mean, and still I would say in most corporate headquarters, I would think, Europe is still seen as accumulation of countries. And there is a lot of discussion about the specifics of a country versus the other one, and comparing regulation and all this thing, which makes it difficult to appear as a one market with different rules and processes.
Thank you, Pierre. Dirk, you've traveled quite a bit around the world, and obviously you've got a very important role as a member of the Parliament. Do you see a big gap when you travel and hear when people say about Europe and then say, but it's not true, or what do you hear?
There's actually always the factor of exaggeration. When you travel to the United States, people ask you whether Europe is still there, whether it has fallen apart. I actually get two questions. The first question is Belgium still there? And the second question is how is it going in Europe? So there is a perception of Europe in the full crisis, but I have to say that you see, the most important thing of the European Union, which is basically the core of it, is the internal market. It's not so much the euro. The euro is a currency, but the internal market is the biggest asset. But the internal market is not working properly at the moment. I used to work in the Commission for 7 years, among others in the cabinet of then Commissioner Bolkestein, and he was responsible for launching the Services Directive. And when this happened in 2004, we were depicted as the villains of Europe, particularly in France, by the way. And when now the Commission speaks about recovery, jobs, and growth, they refer to the Services Directive, how necessary it is that we have a proper free movement of services. So I think the outside world regards Europe with a certain pessimism. We have still the potential, but it's also slightly slipping us out of our hands. If you ask a young Belgian what his main ambition is, then he'll say, I want to become an official. Of course, this is not the right answer. And well, he should say, I want to become an entrepreneur, or something like that. He wants to start a business or something. But it's not what you hear, because people are looking for certainty within the state rather than within a company.
Thank you, Dirk. Takahiro, what's the perception in Japan about Europe? Do you even know we exist here?
Yes. existing. And okay, so I'd like to give a comment about some perception or expectation for EU from one of the Japanese companies' point of view. We have three elements of expectation for European Union. The first element is EU market. Of course, the many Japanese manufacturers especially are challenging to get into the European market because there is a high level market competition, which makes products improvement, and we like to keep developing our business activities in Europe market. And second element is cooperation work. EU, also Japan, we have a common problems which we can solve together. For example, energy efficiency or resource efficiency, and also aging society. Such kind of subjects are most important objectives in Europe 2020 also. So it is possible to coordinate to set up such kind of a certain cooperation work between European and Japanese companies. And third point is partnership. I understand there is a big opportunity or potentiality for European and Japanese companies that we can jointly work for the other market. Of course, this is Asian or now coming to movement to Africa. So we'd like to share our experience each other and to bring appropriate products or service, technologies, business model into this new market. This is our expectation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can now move to Edinburgh, to Jim Barber. Jim, are you there? There you are. Hi. Morning, Jim.
Morning, Bob. How are you?
Very good.
Good.
So
am I on, Bob?
You're on. You're on.
Great, great. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody in Brussels.
You're live here. Can I get Jim, your perception? You travel all the time, and congratulations in your new international role that you have at UPS. You're all around all the time. When you talk about Europe to headquarters, do they give you funny looks?
Funny looks. I would say that based on the last couple of years, probably have more questions about the return on Europe and our view going forward than the funny looks, if that makes sense. So if just kind of on the back of that, Bob, if I could kind of go forward and talk specifically about how UPS looks at Europe today for a few minutes, and if that prompts a few questions, then that'd be great. But just by a way of backdrop, we've been in Europe now since 1976. We've really enjoyed the time over here. We think we've been a great partner of Europe in the economy. We actually employ about 43,000 people in Europe today. And if you kind of take a look at UPS across the globe, if you look at what's moving through our network every day, it happens to be about 2% of global GDP. So the combination of those two factors, we really do consider ourselves a European player, and we really do have a vested interest in the economy. We also know today that obviously it's kind of testing times for Europe, and each organization has to make decisions about where they go and how they invest going forward. And at UPS, even though there are some challenges there, I'm sure the conference is focused on much of that today and the solutions for that, we still remain very committed to Europe. And we believe it to be a great ground for continued investment in the years going forward. But really, if we talk about probably the conference today and Europe getting back on track, it really moves us to the conversation about how we do that in a very shifting international landscape. And then this morning, my really kind of key point for us at UPS would be to talk for a minute about our view of the importance of the transatlantic partnership. So if I could walk through that for a second, I would certainly appreciate that. When it comes to TTIP, obviously it's a very significant opportunity, we believe, for economic growth, for the creation of new jobs. And we're hopeful that the leaders really grasp this and will complete the processes for approval for this before the summer. From our perspective, when we kind of take a look at TTIP, we're in our business of logistics, we believe the objectives align very nicely to our business, and specifically, it generates more trade. It moves more goods through the network, and it allows us to continue to invest and continue to hire, not just in Europe, but in the U.S. and abroad. Specifically, we've sized what we believe to be the advantages of TTIP in our business model. And over the next 10 years, if it's sized the way we believe it could help the economy both in and connected to Europe, we see it adding to our network somewhere around 130 million packages, and we believe can create upwards of 24,000 new jobs over the next 10 years. So that specifically is why we really believe that TTIP is great for most of us in business, and we believe the leaders have to be really challenged to get that done. Focusing a little bit more beneath that, you get to the small and medium enterprise side of that, and you take a look at that, and those new business models and the e-commerce models of the world, we believe, is another factor that the TTIP can help Europe grow as well as the others. And we believe that the concept of friction-free trading that TTIP starts to focus on is really one of the key priorities, and it's one of the critical elements. And beneath that, it really gets at modernizing the customs processes and the removal of bottlenecks that really free up the supply chain across the world. So we're very bullish on TTIP. We certainly support it. We believe the European leaders should as well, and we should grasp this great opportunity. And it leads you really to, from our perspective and mine specifically, to people, because it does all come down to people in most businesses. And loyal and capable people is how we at UPS have been able to grow our business for 105, now 106 years almost. And we really believe that if we kind of seize these opportunities right now with TTIP and some of the other factors you'll discuss today in Brussels, that we believe it has an opportunity. And when the organizations, our corporate organizations, ask us in the field, what do you think about Europe? That we really do believe it's a continued place for great investment, but change certainly is called for at this point. And like I said, we have great hope in TTIP, and we believe it's time to focus on that and other agreements to facilitate the trade and the economic growth. We know at UPS the challenges do lie ahead, but since 1976 we've been here. We still are very happy with the business model, and we believe we will continue to be a major employer here in Europe for years to come, and look forward to continuing to work with the leaders here as well. So with that, Bob, I'll give it back to you, and any more questions as we go, I'd be happy to field them.
Thank you, Jim. We will come back to the questions. Let me just finish going around the table. Thierry, could you give me your perception, and is there a gap?
Yeah. So thank you, Bob. With a pleasure, I'm leading a European organizations which is quite successful. We are the benefit being in the aerospace markets, very dynamic markets, looking to have a more than double-digit growth over the next 5 years. We're about 2,000 people now in Europe. We've been here forever to some extent. We're going to continue to invest, adding people, adding capacity. About 1,000 people in the next 5 years. As my neighbor on the left, I think we see Europe as a great opportunity for our business. We support and follow our customers, but also in some respect we need to get organized on a European basis or global basis, but we also different countries and getting organizations to deal in every country, different culture, different language, but also different regulations and laws, which is sometimes is not so easy to cope with. And certainly there's some room for improvement in that area on the tax, fiscal areas, and there's something I would love to see some progress in that respect.
Thank you, Thierry. I know, Mark, let me just ask you, I know you've got a couple of slides you didn't show yet about the perceptions and the gap between the reality. Do you want to show those and just comment on them? Can we get the second set of slides up from Ernst & Young?
You know, I'm a consultant. I love to show slides. It's as if you didn't have enough with mine earlier. Yeah, I think a couple of them out of the 2 or 3 additional slides we prepared on this, because as you heard before, we try to understand this very intriguing fact that there is a mismatch, a great mismatch, a divide, a gap between perception and reality, and I think that's one of the objectives of our discussion conversation today. I've shown you a little bit ahead this global map, which we should be moving to the next slides. There it is. Thanks very much. Where we put on the board in yellow the perception votes. What, as I said before, you think are among the 3 most attractive destinations for your future investments. So top 3 destinations, 800 executives, and again, Europe's number 2, China's number 1. But the gray area is the actual share of foreign direct investment in capital, foreign direct investment inflows as recorded by the UNCTAD, 2012. So the mismatch, and we can see it a little bit better on the next slide, I love these charts, shows that actually on the left-hand side, Europe has the smaller gap among all the other regions, and China and Brazil, I wouldn't say are overrated by any means. That's not what I mean. It's just that there is a pressure, a buzz, a perception of love that is bigger than the love itself. I like the image. It's my personal DNA. China has the biggest gap. We all know that's where probably a lot of us and our children will live or will live by in the next decades. But this is, just putting the numbers on the board, I think is an interesting and intriguing fact, and we've discussed some of the reasons. I want to let the panel probably answer some of the questions. And I want to show you the last slide, because when you dive into Europe, when I said Europe is the sum of its parts, one of its core strengths is its diversity, we have to understand the country, regional, and city factor as well, where probably at the local level we also have to find new energies to revamp and renovate, reinvigorate Europe's image and Europe's project. Some of the countries have a glaring perception-reality mismatch. Germany and the UK are in the opposite situation. The most favorable perception gap is the UK. The reality is when I say most favorable, is that the reality of actual foreign direct investment into the UK is bigger than what it's perceived to receive for foreign direct investment, so it's in a better place. So it gets the money, maybe not the love, but the money. And eastwards, Poland has is number 1 in perception ratings, number 1 in terms of your actual projects. And we have some newcomers, new kids on the block, big kids, big kids, Turkey, Serbia, where that do not appear on this rating and perception rating leaderboard, but try to get and are getting a lot of your actual attention and projects. Bob, that's you're very far away, very close to me in mind, but very far away, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mark, for that data, and anybody that's interested in a copy of those slides, we'll make sure, if you talk to Mark at the break, he'll make sure you get a copy of those slides. It's interesting. We thought actually that the gap, when I've spoken to many of you in preparation of the conference, the message is there's a gap, but nevertheless, we still believe in Europe. And so we asked 4 CEOs, and I'll be showing you during this morning's conference those videos from CEOs. Do they believe in Europe? Do they believe that Europe is still relevant? And I'd like to start now with a video from a Chinese company, Huawei, from one of their board directors. We asked the question, is Europe still relevant, and why are you interested in investing in Europe? So can we have that first video, please, from Huawei?
Hello everyone. On our journey to globalization, Europe has played a very important role. It has an open industry environment, a tradition of free trade, and a highly skilled workforce. Europe is a major destination for our long-term investments. In the past 5 years, our total procurement in Europe has exceeded $10 billion. We have also established 2 R&D centers and 6 centers of expertise across Europe. And we are proud to employ over 7,500 staff in the region. We are now building 32 4G networks in Europe, working closely with local partners. Huawei is also part of the 7th EU Framework Program related to R&D. We are providing internship opportunities for students and recruiting outstanding graduates from the UK and France. And we sponsor the wonderful charitable organizations, the Prince's Trust in the UK, and the Chinese Culture Year in Germany. Huawei will continue to invest in Europe and to create unique value for our customers. And we will help to bridge the digital divide by providing broadband for all. Huawei is committed to connecting Europe and to connecting possibilities. Enjoy the conference.
So clearly a commitment to invest in Europe and investing in particularly technology. Let me turn first to Jim in Edinburgh. Jim, do you what did you take? Were you assuming you were able to see that video?
I could see it, Bob.
What do you take from the message that we get from Huawei there?
Well, I mean, obviously, part of the world you're coming, and Huawei would be coming from the east side, and that Europe's a great market. It has great advantages. They have challenges right now, but you can't ignore Europe. Europe happens to be the largest exporting entity in the entire world. So if you're going to say you're a global organization and you have growth aspirations and investment aspirations, you can't go around Europe. There's no question about that. The real question becomes how Europe now evolves and goes forward in these challenging times to continue to fight for its rightful share of foreign direct investment and growth, and the things that we'll continue to talk about today at the conference.
Thanks, Jim. Dirk, when we talk about investment into the European arena, you certainly get some feedbacks from some segments that say it's fine, except we won't let the Chinese in. What's your perception on that question?
Well, thanks, Bob, for that question. I'm in a group which is called the European Conservatives and Reformists. Now we're in the lucky situation that European conservatives and Chinese communists are on the same side of the issue. We both are in favor of free trade. We think that free trade is important and is the driving force for growth. And I'm very sorry to see that this trade relationship with China is getting increasingly sour. That's not good. We are focusing perhaps a bit too much on solar panels because our trade relationship comprises more than only solar panels, and I think we should also look at the total picture. When you talk about Huawei, the Commission started an anti-dumping procedure against Huawei without giving any reason. We actually don't know why this investigation is taking place. I mean, I'm a member of Parliament. I can ask a parliamentary question to the Commissioner for Trade. I don't know why. Huawei doesn't know why. And these things are polluting our good trade relationship with China. I'm also Vice President of the China-European Parliament Friendship Association, because I think it is very important. And I mean, if we are not growing enough in Europe, we should not sort of isolate ourselves from a very fast and rapidly growing market.
Thanks, Dirk. Pascal, what do you hear from your clients across the region about China? And is there concern about too much investment, not enough, regulatory questions? What do you hear from your clients?
We hear a very different perspective on China. One, certainly a market where you need to be, and some place where you need to invest heavily. Second, probably a place where you need to be prudent, and specifically when you are creating joint venture. I think there is an history of mistakes that have been done in the past, and now we have most of the companies have learned how to deal with this in China. I think it's important. But certainly, most of our clients would regard China as the key place to invest, even if we see a rebalancing with countries neighbor to China in the current time.
Thank you, Pascal. Takahiro, what advice would you give a company? I mean, Japan has been investing for a long time in Europe. If you were the consultant to a Chinese company and tell them, here are our lessons learned over the last 25 years about how to do business in Europe, what would you tell your Chinese client?
If I would suggest a Chinese company, or that maybe the situation in Chinese companies is like 1960s of Japanese companies, and yeah, of course, at that time we have learned a lot in the market, real, very, very severe market, and maybe the same way. So the Chinese companies can learn a lot, but maybe there is a differences between Japan and China. Is Japan is already most westernized, and this is a very long history. But so Chinese companies are still the small experience in the global market, and there's a gap between reality and perception in China side. Yeah.
Thank you. Thierry, what advice would you give a Chinese company coming into Europe?
In fact, before coming here, I just questioned my Chinese team here and got their feedback last night. And some interesting perspective. I think, first of all, I think in the Chinese, I think they see Europe as being the teacher for technology, science, and civilizations. For people within Chinese, how it's important, you know how it's important to be history, relationship, and culture. But clearly, I think Europe is facing crisis. They are looking, we are looking, cutting welfare, we have currency challenges, and what Chinese are saying, Europe needs to be improve its competitiveness, need cut tax, balancing out debt to assets, pensions, but more is promote innovations. Chinese are very eager to buy technology, high-tech product from Europe. We need to continue to invest in innovations, and clearly is continue to have a sustainable competitive edge here. Chinese have concern. We just mentioned the solar panel stories or gas emissions for airlines, so making tough discussions between, I think, selling Airbus today in China, which is a challenge for us to some extent. But I think the Chinese don't see this as a long-term issue. It's more short-term issue. We need some resolutions here. And that's still very positive, in fact. And they see a big trend. They see the Japanese companies moving out from China, going to Southeast Asia. The US companies now backing more manufacturing in the US. There's a place for Europe and China to work together.
Thank you, Pierre.
Yeah, I would say in ABB we have a practice which is called in country for country. And one of the things we're trying to do is to be, and I think we are, Chinese and China, and European and Europe, and French and France, and so on, you know. And if you look at ABB, the way it was created, it's actually a multicultural net. There is, I think, 100 nationalities in the headquarters of ABB. So one of the things I think we want is to be present in all these markets. At the same time, for us, free trade is very important because you need to exchange in between these based on the expertise of everyone and make sure that you have balanced trade in between the different part of the organization, I would say. So for us, I mean, Chinese in coming to Europe is good news, the same way as European going to China is good news.
Well, let's move across borders, and now let's listen to one of the leaders from the IT industry in India, Tata. Can we have the Tata video, please?
Greetings to all of you. I'm delighted to speak with you as you are gathered to discuss the state of the European Union. Europe is an extremely important region for both the Tata Group and Tata Consultancy Services. Tata Consultancy Services has been present in Europe since 1975 and has over the last 4 decades expanded its operations to 21 countries in the region with well over 15,000 employees. European economy is not only important for the countries in Europe, it is extremely important for the global economy. Europe has been a land of innovation. Many things have come out of Europe, and today the world is actively looking for Europe to achieve the next level of innovation, to take the growth to a different level. And at TCS, we have been continuously investing and have established a strong footprint across UK, Germany, France, Nordics, Benelux, Switzerland and other regions. Recently, we announced a major investment in France in the form of acquisition of Alti, an IT consulting company with over 1,200 employees. And we are delighted to bring Alti back to TCS fold and expand our presence in France. Today, we are in a unique time in terms of technology. The number of technologies that are coming together in the form of mobility, social, big data, analytics and cloud computing is making everyone to think about the enormous potential to their businesses. Every business and every government is adopting these technologies and are reinventing themselves. At TCS, we have made significant investments in building capability in these technologies, and more importantly, building solutions that are relevant to different industries and government in leveraging these technologies. We expect to see a significant expansion of our presence in Europe by working with companies and governments in leveraging these technologies. Finally, I would like to say that there is an enormous innovation opportunity for companies and governments in Europe, and I look forward to that making a difference to Europe as well as for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Jim, we're going to turn it over to you in Edinburgh. Clearly, one of the opportunities that was identified by Tata is the strength of the human resources that they find here in Europe. And you also mentioned it. Do you think that the people that you're finding across Europe, you find enough of them, easy to hire, easy to keep, compared to the other regions that you're responsible for?
I think that has, you have to weigh it depending on what part of Europe you're talking about, but certainly the people that we're able to hire and bring on as UPSers, we feel great about the quality of the people that we hire. I think the only challenge, Bob, that we face a bit, I think Europe is going to have to continue to grapple and find a solution, is the mobility of it. We do have struggles in Europe to move the employees to where we'd like to have them at times. I think we've been very successful in the past, but as Europe as a union tends to have a north-south kind of bifurcation right now, there is a need obviously at times to move your skilled people to your best opportunities, just like an investment side. And we struggle with that a little bit in our business, but our business is a little bit different from our promotion from within philosophy. But we've been able to manage it over the last 35 years, but I do think it's an opportunity going forward for Europe to continue to take something and perhaps create another advantage out of one of the real strengths of Europe, which is human capital.
Thank you, Jim. Pascal, how about your experience at E&Y? You do a lot of recruiting on an annual basis of young people. Do you find it very different than your recruiting process back in the U.S. or in other regions?
To be honest, for us, the real difficulty is not the recruitment piece. I think I would stress again what has been mentioned on mobility. If my memory is right, only 10 million of Europeans are living outside their home country, which is very little compared to the total population. And we as companies, we are facing huge difficulties to make our people more mobile and to respond to our client needs. So in my view, that's probably one of the key issues that we are facing in Europe and something that we should deal with quite rapidly.
Thank you. Takahiro, do you, as a Japanese company, find it easy to recruit Europeans into the company, or are you basically moving Japanese here to the continent and to the UK?
I think most Japanese manufacturers which invested their factory side in Europe, they don't have very severe difficulties to recruit human resource, but this is like a local to local. So French, for example, in France, Japanese manufacturers can recruit in the locally, and for example, our company is trading and investment, so we are facing a little bit difficulties for like mobilities. So we like to put from the move from the London to Frankfurt, but if the employees reject, so nothing to do, impossible to manage it. So movement in Europe is still some big barrier for us.
Dirk, how often do you at the institutions you participate in hear about this issue of mobility, and is this really an issue? I mean, you're moving around a lot. What do you hear?
Well, I have no problem with labor mobility myself, but generally you're right, in Europe people like to stay close to where they live or were born or where their family is, and they want to have tea with the grandmother and the grandfather on Sunday, so the whole social structure is built around that social life. And even in country it's very hard to make sure that people are a bit more mobile. For example, for the airport in Zaventem, it is sometimes hard to get workers who live in Wallonia, which is not so far away, but they think, okay, it's, why should the work not come to me instead of me going to the work? You see, if this issue is discussed in the European Parliament, the left will always say, oh, but we need a social Europe. And a social Europe means strong unions and a rigid labor market. And what we're trying to prove every time is that rigid labor markets create unemployment. And the labor markets in Spain are very rigid. You're either in or out. And as a result, unemployment is about 25%, and youth unemployment is 50%. And that is not a social model. That's a social tragedy. And it's about time that unions understand this. We are in favor of more flexible labor markets, try to push through that barrier of rigid labor markets and a small labor mobility as we see it at the moment, because it is absolutely essential that people are able to move around. The United States has a huge labor mobility, that people go to where the work is. Over the past 30 years we have seen a huge flow of people from the north to the south. If you come to Florida, many inhabitants are basically from Pennsylvania or from Michigan. Well, I always ask a Floridian where he comes from originally. But we don't have that here. And of course culture and language may be a barrier, but the mindset has to be changed. And I hope that we can change the mindset of the young generation with programs like Erasmus and other things, so that they open their mind and they see there is another world in another country, and it's a very nice world. And I've done it myself, and I'm very glad I did it.
Thierry, how much of an issue is mobility at Hexcel?
Yeah, I think it's certainly some part of an issue, but also we're dealing, I think, with operations across Europe in 7-8 countries, so to some extent we are able to manage it. But certainly we would like as well to have more mobility, but also more flexibility in particular in every country, which is a key element here. But certainly, I think, just a recent story, last week I was recruiting 2 PhDs from the same country. One was coming from Erasmus and traveling around Europe, even the world, in fact. And the other one was just staying for their country. I think the choice was evident for us. I think clearly, from the education at the young people here, I think it's critical, I guess, we get our children the chance, the opportunity to see the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think mobility is, as you were mentioning, a big asset of the U.S. economy, actually, because it enables the economy to adapt itself much more rapidly than it is maybe in Europe. For us, we have this issue of mobility. We have a bit of an issue in hiring people sometimes because of specific trade where people are not necessarily available. But mobility is the biggest issue, and I think mobility by itself means little. I think what is behind is how quickly industry can adapt themselves to changing market conditions. And if you have quite a flexible labor and mobility in the labor, then you can more rapidly adapt to a different market environment and adjust your industrial structure so that you can be more relevant in the market.
Thank you, Pierre. Let's now move to our next video from P&G. We'll kick off the discussion. And can I ask the technical people to up the sound and the volume just a little bit from the microphones here from my panelists? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the State of the European Union Conference by video at this important time in the EU's history. P&G has a long and rich history in Europe. We started operations in the United Kingdom in 1930. Today we do business in all 27 member states, and we have multiple research and development, manufacturing, and service centers in the European Union. Is Europe still relevant? Why, yes, of course it is. The European Union remains a model of regional cooperation and integration despite the recent economic challenges. The European Union is home to millions of people we serve and people we want to serve, highly informed and educated consumers who inspire our breakthrough innovations, particularly in the area of sustainability. Strengthening EU market integration will benefit citizens, consumers, and businesses alike. A solid, well-functioning European Union and Eurozone will result in sustainable economic growth and job creation. Growth will also come from deepening trade liberalizations such as the conclusion of a transatlantic trade and investment partnership, and further investment in partnerships and dialogues between business, governments, and civil society with a focus toward a goal of achieving effective global governance. Thank you.
Jim, I'm guessing that's music to your ears. Your view?
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with the comments from P&G, and I would focus on a point, though, Bob, that I think is important as well, is that a great opportunity for Europe, and it has to do with the small to medium enterprise, and the focus on those SMEs and entrepreneurs to really drive the growth going forward. And I think that is a great opportunity for Europe. I know that various commissioners are looking at different ways to stimulate it. Personally, I think some of the angles should be thought through in a different way. I think we've got to look at those as a real trade engine for Europe and take a look at how many are actually transacting business across borders within the EU, and ask ourselves if that might not be an area to really help Europe focus on its growth from within. Even in the U.S. today, less than 1% of U.S. Enterprises export outside of the U.S. So that you've got situations here that in the EU and within the scope of what it's going to try and do in the years and decades to come, I believe that the SMEs deserve and the entrepreneurs deserve a stake at the table, and perhaps all of us should be thinking about that as well to move Europe forward.
Thanks, Jim. Pascal, in your experience, do you see that the SMEs are waking up to the opportunity, or are they still very frustrated with all of the bureaucracy that they need to do to export?
First, I would like to confirm that from our perspective, SMEs are the one who are driving growth, which is a good news for the future. Unfortunately, I don't think we can have one single answer to your question, because the world or Europe is very diverse, as we said, and probably the situation in Germany is completely different from the situation in my own country, France. And that's where probably in France we are lacking of growth, is because our SMEs are a little bit afraid to go outside the country and not really supported by our government entities. So I think if one thing for Europe was to be done for the SME, it would be to simplify things for them, and to help them jointly to go outside Europe and not make it by countries.
Takahiro? what is the experience in Japan of small companies helping Japan Inc. export? And are there any lessons that you think that we can take out of Japan to help the SMEs here in Europe?
Yes. Recently, that means almost last 10 years, Japanese government set a new support system for the SME, for especially the R&D phase. And always there is a problem. This is a step by step. After the development phase, to move to business, making a business, there is a huge gap. So we call death barrier. And now there is some support system in Japan is to invest or to support money to link between development and to making a business side. So this is a good example, and maybe European Commission or for example, Horizon 2020, they would have the same system to support SME, especially around the field. Yeah.
Thanks. Dirk, do you guys talk about SMEs?
That's actually also a favorite topic of us. And obviously that's very important. Both when I work in the Commission, SMEs are at the heart of the internal market, the single market. And now again, and the major problem, the biggest problem for SMEs actually at the moment is access to capital. The problem in the Eurozone is that the transmission of money to end users is clogged. So the ECB has given out loans to major banks for an amount of more than 1 billion at an interest rate of nearly, well, about 1%. But if an SME in northern Italy wants to borrow money, it pays about 10% or 13%. Now, paying so much interest rate for a loan, of course, is not affordable for an SME. So what you see in northern Italy, which is the backbone of the Italian economy, is that the SMEs actually have difficulty getting to money. They living off their capital because many companies are family companies, and the economy is not growing. And on top they get taxation, more taxes. So it's not saving to death, but rather taxing to death what happens there. And that is a very difficult structural side effect of the current Euro crisis, and that's precisely the reason why the SMEs are suffering most.
Thierry?
I'm just backing and supporting what has been said before. I think it's certainly not an easy path forward for an entrepreneur, startup, developing a company from scratch or from innovations, from a new product, new idea, new services. And at one point of time, I think it's certainly need capital to support the growth, and it's not easy access. Of course, there are different countries and different rates for depending where you are, but is access to capital as a public or from private capitals or business funds is certainly not easy in Europe, access here. And certainly is a struggling path, or just getting bought or selling the company, then is maybe the easy access, which is maybe lack of SMEs at the end.
Actually, you know, venture capitalists were part of the success of the Silicon Valley. And is it working? I was saying that venture capitalists are part of the success of Silicon Valley because they provide money to the entrepreneur. You know? And the R&D part and the development part is very critical, but to transform a researcher and an inventor into a businessman is not an easy task. I've been involved in venture cap in the past, and that's not easily done. But clearly there is a need for people to take risk and jump in there to support these type of businesses. Otherwise, they won't come out. I mean, it's not banks and through loans, for instance, that will be able to do that. You know, it needs to be really money at risk.
Great. Can we pass now the last video from Otis?
Hello everyone, I am Pedro Sainz de Baranda, President of the Otis Elevator Company, a division of United Technologies Corporation. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with all of you today. As many of you know, UTC is a multinational corporation specializing in the research, development, manufacturing and servicing of aerospace and commercial building products. We have a very large presence in Europe with more than 64,000 employees in 33 countries and 1,600 locations. Last year, 26% of the company's net sales were generated in Europe. Sikorsky Black Hawk helicopters are manufactured in Poland. Carrier air conditioners help maintain the climate in the Sistine Chapel, and Otis elevators take people to the top of the Eiffel Tower every day. As a Spaniard, I of course have a particular interest in the economic prosperity of Europe, and I am keenly aware of the opportunities and challenges of doing business here. I see several positive growth opportunities that are already present in much of Europe today. Quality infrastructure, the tradition of design and manufacturing excellence, and a skilled, productive, and educated workforce that provides the basis for innovation and productivity improvements and is a great source of talent for organizations around the world. Within my own company, Otis, I am pleased with several recent achievements by our European businesses. Otis Italy, for example, recently developed an elevator that can run on regenerative battery power in the event of a power failure. A great product, not just for Italy, but also for developing markets like India and Brazil. This is a great example and reminder that growth and innovation is not just coming from emerging markets. It is coming from Europe too. And Otis teams in Spain and Portugal recently completed a major acquisition, adding 450 employees and 18,000 new customers, which are a great investment, even in a tough economy. Now, with that said, there are several challenges facing multinationals such as Otis and UTC that could be addressed to ensure that Europe continues to be an attractive place to do business for companies such as ours. First, government regulation must be stabilized and rationalized. Laws that are frequently changing, sometimes complex, particularly labor laws, directly impact the cost of doing business and ultimately the value that we can deliver to our customers. Second, the tax treatment of foreign executives residing in Europe must be addressed, particularly in France. This is critical to ensure that Europe remains attractive for global talent and a location of choice for establishing central offices. Third, if Europe is to remain a global manufacturing leader, governments must address the competitive challenges brought on by Europe's comparatively high wage structure. And finally, investment. With increasing competition for global capital from high-growth economies, European governments must take the steps to incentivize foreign multinationals to invest their capital and their talent into Europe. So in summary, though I know many parts of Europe have had a tough economy in the past few years, I'm getting more optimistic about the economic and business prospects. If we can better leverage some existing opportunities and implement some regulatory changes, I think we'll all see positive news and achievements coming out of Europe in the years to come. Thank you.
Jim, regulatory changes, helpful, required?
Well, I think the answer is yes, they're required. Are they helpful? That probably is what we're all at times struggling with, to make sure that we know that they're necessary, we know that centralization of some of the regulations is the way forward for the central market, but making sure that they are helpful to the growth prospects is very critical. I think the last video had a comment about, and a comment previously on from one of the panelists about the rigidity of the labor markets, and then we had regulations here around labor as well, and we had high wage numbers as well. I think all of those come together. It has to be addressed going forward.
Ho detto
Talking about here in
anche
Europe,
la tua idea, la vostra idea di tenerlo sulla scrivania.
continuing to grow going forward, so that I think all those comments
avevamo deciso l'altra sera.
sense, but
Sì, però c'è poca luce e stiamo cercando di capire. Prima abbiamo provato mettendolo lì.
I'm getting reverb back.
Mezz'ora e non.
That's my comment. I mean, I think the focus has to be on labor and some of the comments from the video as well, because it's very important. In our business, for example, if we're in a country with a 35-hour work week, it's very hard for us to dispatch to consumers in a model such as that and do it efficiently and effectively, and hence some of those regulations, for example, really kind of prevent us from putting capital behind it and continue to grow our business. We tend to move that capital allocation to other places within Europe or within some other growing regions. So that, yes, regulation is important. I think where we are today, it has to be very much targeted at growth opportunities and not just regulation for regulation's sake. So those would be my comments, Bob.
Thanks, Jim. Pascal, tax is obviously something that E&Y deals with all the time. Do we have any hope of seeing reasonable tax rates across Europe for foreign executives?
Don't ask me. Hopefully, yes. Unfortunately, we cannot foresee that in the next future, I would say. As you know, we have too many differences, but probably the major constraint is the fact that we don't have a perspective. And that's something which is really important for all the businessmen around these tables, is that we need perspective to invest and to know what to do. And we cannot play with tax rates every year, additioning one element, retracting another one, etc., etc. So my plea to the politician would be at least to have a medium to long-term perspective.
Dirk, I'll turn it right to you. You just heard a plea from a business person saying, please help us, give us some perspective on where we're going with the European tax, or is it still going to continue to be 27, soon to be 28 different tax regimes? Is this a topic that will be addressed in the short term, or is this something that we just have to live with on a day-to-day basis for the next couple of years or decades?
Well, somehow we have to live with taxation anyway. It just depends on what the level is. Now, if you look at the current situation in the European Union, the way governments want to reduce their budget deficits is in many cases by increasing taxation. Then the famous word comes out, who has to pay that taxation is the rich. But what is rich? Effectively, what we're doing, we're taxing the working. And we're also taxing a lot those who create work, the providers of work. And by doing so, we threaten to chase them out of the European Union. And on top, we have special taxation for those who we regard as the culprits of the financial crisis, for example, the banking world. Europe is now talking about a financial transaction tax. I think there are about 11 countries that want to introduce it. I'm against. I think it's a bad idea. It's a good example of a bad idea. It's precisely what they're doing. But in the European Parliament, some, if I may use the word French socialists, will tend to say we're in this crisis because taxation is too low. We need more taxation. Now, I think the FTT is a very bad idea because it will chase financial services out of the Eurozone. And I think the City of London is just waiting for it to come there, and perhaps companies in Switzerland. But we're doing actually precisely the wrong thing because we make the wrong analysis. And if we put our priorities right, we put competitiveness on the top of the agenda, then the logical conclusion is that taxes have to be reduced and not increased. But I have to admit I belong to a minority in the European Parliament, unfortunately.
Pierre?
Yeah, that's an issue, obviously, in a number of countries, and I have a personal view of that, which is coming from the fact that I'm from North America and I was involved in businesses in the U.S. and in other parts of the world. And in another life, some years ago, we bought a company in one of the U.S. states, and at the same time, we were buying a company in France. And the deal in the U.S. took about 4 weeks to close. We had complete flexibility of labor, I would say to an extreme, because we could lay off people without notice and just tell them at the end of the day they should go home, which people here would say, are these people crazy, you know? If you put yourself in the shoes of the person in that state, he has the same reaction when he listened about the labor loss in France. So to me, one of the big issues here is not so much the cost of that, it's the time and the process and the heaviness of the process to go through, you know. If you can protect people with social regulation that will protect them financially without necessarily trying to save jobs in industry which are in decreasing. You cannot move these people into a new industry that is starting to grow. You know? So I think the process is more about the issue is more about the process than about the cost, in my own perspective.
Yeah, it's maybe a bit of both. I think certainly heavy process, heavy regulations in different countries. I think we need a lot of lawyers to help us support us here doing business in Europe, in every country. I think we need PhDs to establish payrolls now in most of the countries as well. But tax is also an important factor as well when you look at investment in a particular country or business. And certainly I would support as well this view. I think is raising tax today is certainly not helping our competitiveness. And certainly I think we need to put the right priority. And it's a tough challenge as well. We need to reduce our debt, that's clear as well. And how we find the right equation, the right priorities. It's a big challenge here where Europe and every country to some extent need to support and find solutions, which I understand is not easy.